For decades, collecting baseball cards meant collecting Topps baseball cards. By default, baseball cards meant Topps baseball cards. Even in the slop-tier years of Topps baseball cards, the company was generally seen as the leader of the pack. And the Topps brand has somehow managed to survive through the years despite some of the stupidest stunts that I've ever seen a sports card company come out with. But, is today's Topps really the same company as the traditional Topps company, the one that we all grew up knowing and loving? And how in the world did that company get that kind of market power in the first place? Well, today we're going to dig into all of that and some more. Now, the thing is that image we have of Topps as the long-standing industry leader, it doesn't really fit in that well with the actual history of the company. Now, the older cards from the 1950s look nice, sure, but Topps didn't become a baseball card monopoly because it made cards that looked nice. And as nice as the 2026 75th anniversary packaging looks, the truth is that Topps has fallen pretty far in recent years. As nice as these cards look at first glance, they are honestly pretty bland, especially in person, and I seriously think that the design comes straight from artificial intelligence. The classic and famous designs of the past are all but gone, replaced by designs that feel robotic and impersonal. So in other words, when I'm talking about the fall of Topps, I'm really talking about how bad modern Topps are compared to what the company had in the past. But I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different than what you expect. I'm going to talk about some of this stuff in chronological order, sure, but I'm also going to end up skipping around a little bit. So what you've got to realize is that there's not just one rise of Topps, there's more than one. There's also been more than one monopoly era of Topps, and there was more than one fall of Topps as well. So let's just jump right in. As you may or may not know, Topps started out as a chewing gum company back in the 1930s. Of course, chewing gum has been around for quite some time and was dominated by Wrigley's, a company that still maintains a lot of market share to this day. But of course, there were also other companies in the chewing gum business battling for the same market share. In fact, the chewing gum market of the 1920s and 30s was marked by tons of small companies trying to outdo each other to sell more penny packs of gum. And that's where a lot of ideas and innovations came into the industry. After all, everybody and their dog was trying to sell chewing gum. It was really popular in the 1910s and early 1920s. Now, if everybody's selling this, you've got your company's brand and you want people to buy your brand instead of like Wrigley's, you've got to do something to make it so people want to buy it. They would give it like a zany name or something like that, or they would like have advertisements that would talk about how it help you if you have like an upset stomach or something like that. The thing is that cutting prices alone would help a little bit, but at some extent you can't keep cutting prices because you won't have any profit. Anyway, in the late 1920s, there was this man named Walter Deemer who came out with a certain type of stretchy gum, one that you could blow bubbles with. Deemer worked for a company you might have heard of called Fleer. Anyway, Fleer marketed this stuff under the name Double Bubble, which is where the name bubblegum originally comes from. And just so that we're on the same page here and so that we understand each other, when I'm talking about Fleer, this is the exact same Fleer company that later made those famous baseball cards, right? Just like our favorite card, the Rick Face Billy Ripken card back in 1989, you know what I'm saying? So Fleer might have been kind of new to baseball cards then, but its history in the industry is very, very long, like the gum industry. In fact, Fleer was around long before Topps was even conceived of. Now, Fleer was an industry leader in bubblegum back in the late 1920s, sure. But the problem that Fleer had is that all of the other gum companies caught on quickly. You see, the issue with gum is that it's not hard to make. It's not a question of getting the flavor right or getting the packaging right or whatever. It's always just been a question of trying to scale up as quickly as possible to capture a bunch of market share and then just shut everybody else out. And Fleer didn't exactly do a great job of that. Before long, there were quite a few companies competing in the growing bubblegum space. Bloney, for example, belonged to a man named Jacob Warren Bowman, and we'll have more to say about Bowman in a second. And there were other companies that you may have heard of that specialized in making bubblegum in those days. You know, you get that sort of thing from time to time in the business world. There's money to be made, and so everybody in the whole world decides to hop on right at the same time. Sort of like what's happened with the AI industry, right? The hard part is making it so that your product is actually substantively different from the other guy's product. And as you know, this is where baseball cards first came from. So baseball cards started out as cardboard inserts in these old cigarette packs. They were designed to help the pack keep its shape and to not disintegrate in like a shirt pocket. The oldest cards are pretty bland and not really all that memorable. Within 25 years, some of the cigarette companies were making cards that really looked like miniature works of art. But it would take another 25 years or so before companies seriously tried to combine baseball cards with gum or bubble gum. The world of cigarette cards are really a pre-World War I phenomenon, and this was also a global thing, by the way. You can find tons of old cigarette cards from like Canada and from all over the British Empire, and those cards would feature all sorts of subjects, right? You'd have like star performers, politicians, famous soldiers, hockey players, you name it. But of course, baseball cards were always the most popular, even going back to the 1880s. That's natural, of course, since baseball is the greatest sport. Though it technically wasn't the first bubblegum baseball card set ever, this 1933 Gaudi gum set is the most famous. It's famous in part because of the gorgeous player renditions. These cards seriously look fabulous. And of course, it's famous because of the one card that wasn't distributed in any packs of gum, one of the biggest controversies in the history of baseball cards. 1933 Gaudi is one of the most important sets in the history of the hobby, and its popularity paved the way for other companies to enter the baseball card world. Now, there was a bit of explosion in baseball cards between 1934 and 1941. So that's when Jacob Warren Bowman decided to get into the act, for example. He started a group of sets that he called Play Ball. But World War II ended up forcing the rationing of stuff like gum and sugar, paper, ink, and a bunch of other supplies, and that put an end to baseball cards, at least for the time being. Now, this video, as you know, is a video about the history of Topps, not the hobby as a whole, so let's just get on with it. Topps began life as a company with this spearmint gum product that was first sold in December 1938. The company came out with a variety of flavors, though I don't know why you would want ginger flavored gum. The early years of the company were filled with gum products like these. And frankly, they didn't really sell all that well. The reason why is really obvious to you, right? There was already Wrigley's chewing gum, which dominated the spearmint gum industry. It still does today, by the way. Now, Topps was trying to get market presence by doing the same thing that everybody else does. It's sort of like, trying to build a YouTube channel by using artificial intelligence to make copies of somebody else's YouTube channel and like putting out the same thing. It doesn't really work that well, and nobody's going to go after your content because it's yours. It just seems generic. But Topps got wise quickly and started to stick in bonus things with its gum. After the end of World War II, Topps came out with its first bubblegum product, a brand that it called Bazooka for obvious military reasons. In keeping with the trends of the space age, Bazooka was called the Atom bubblegum, and the wrapper looked like it was a standard army issue. And it was around 1948 that we first got a glimpse of Bazooka Joe. Bazooka was known for its comic strips for years, a tradition that continued until I was a kid, in fact. And believe it or not, some of the comic strips were focused on baseball. But, Topps was not going to turn Bazooka into a huge seller if its sales campaigns involved only those little comic strips. By the late 1940s, everybody knew that full-color cards was really the way to go. And that wasn't just because of those beautiful T206 sets, 1933 Gaudi and cards like that. No, it's actually because of one of the most famous Bowman sets of all time. This would be the 1938 Horrors of War set. That 1938 Horrors of War set was extremely popular, and it was actually politically significant. My understanding is that FDR used some of these cards to make the case for non-intervention, especially in the war in the Pacific. And the thing is that these scans really don't do these cards justice. You really have to see them in person to get the full experience. Anyway, the combination of excellent artwork and a harrowing subject made these cards absolutely legendary. So for all of our talk about rookie cards and star players and stuff like that, the truth is that sports cards are first and foremost a work of art. The greatest sets of all time, right, are usually great because the cards look really, really great. If you've ever seen like a T206 card in person, you know what I'm talking about. This is why our modern AI-inspired sets are nothing but hot garbage, right? Like the foiling might look nice and like the gold and silver and all this other crap they put in it, like whatever, but I will take one of those Horrors of War cards any day over a modern foil. Anyway, in 1949, Topps started to come out with these little cards that would be sold together with bubblegum. The early cards were pretty simple, cards with national flags and soldiers, for example. They were sold in these parade flag packs, usually one small card along with a small stick of bazooka bubblegum. I mean, yeah, it's not really all that impressive, but at least this was something. And Topps came out with other products in those early years as well. The Magic photo sets were entirely Topps and actually contained a few baseball cards. Okay, so maybe this isn't the most impressive card in the world, but it does seem to be one of the earliest baseball cards that Topps ever came out with. The backs could have used some work, of course. You also had sets like this license plate set, which seems kind of boring to me. And if you're a movie fan, you can always enjoy cards of stars like Mae West. Hey man, you know that Mae West card isn't looking so bad. Maybe I should get a couple of those. Anyway, coming up with those little card sets was a start, I guess, but it wasn't really going to be enough to push Topps over the top, right? Meanwhile, Jacob Warren Bowman had already resurrected his Play Ball brand after World War II ended. Now, those are the cards that we know today as Bowman, but if you look at the packaging, it's obviously that this is actually Play Ball. I don't know who made this decision, whatever, it's just the way that the hobby works. Now, the interesting thing is that Bowman decided to solidify his control over baseball cards through a little something called exclusive contracts. As you guys know, Bowman's first post-war set was this 1948 baseball set, and it wasn't exactly all that inspiring. Actually, I think the 1948 Bowman is one of the worst baseball card sets I've ever seen. Now, in early 1949, a competing gum company called Leaf came out with a set of baseball cards in full color. These cards were designed to go along with Leaf's All-Star Baseball gum. In fact, the All-Star branding was all over the packaging. But the problem that Leaf had is that it printed cards of players who already had exclusive contracts with Bowman. Now, this part is important, so pay attention. I know that this isn't quite Topps yet, but hold on. The thing is that Bowman-Leaf conflict had a lot to do with the strategy that Topps later used to go after Bowman. The court case against Leaf was filed in May 1949, and it was filed under the names of several players. The most famous of these names was Warren Spahn. Leaf had allegedly printed this card representing Warren Spahn without permission, breaking the exclusive contract that Spahn had with Bowman's company. Bowman won in court, and by the way, we know that Leaf set did not come out until March 1949 because of court documents like this one. Anyway, the All-Star gum dream faded away, and Leaf went into the background, not to return to baseball cards for decades. Now, Bowman's cards did get better as time went on, but Topps decided that it wanted to take up the anti-monopoly fight, and so Topps started to attack Bowman head-on, first with a test set, and then with one of the most famous baseball card sets of all time. Honestly, the 1951 Topps baseball set is so embarrassing that it's kind of hard to justify even talking about it. The idea of sticking a black and white photo in the middle of a color card was just bad. I mean, this looks awful. Topps also came out with this tall pop-up set of Major League stars, which has never been popular. There was even a variation for retired players, but the kids didn't buy it. Not even the 2-for-1 promotion could get kids interested in buying these cards. Now, part of the problem is that Bowman had already signed all of the star players to big contracts. And another part of the problem is that the Topps cards looked really, really bad. I mean, really bad, right? It was supposed to help you play like some tabletop baseball game or whatever. I don't think there were ever any rules for it, and it never really worked right. Anyway, Topps decided to go back to the drawing board for its 1952 set, which was a really good idea. I mean, forget about the big money cards, even the common cards just look gorgeous. 1952 Topps is one of those sets that makes you feel good about collecting baseball cards. The player portraits look like works of art because they are works of art. My understanding is that they were paintings based on photographs. And even the backs are iconic. Yeah, I could talk about 1952 Topps baseball all day long. In fact, as most of you know, I already did. I made a video a few weeks ago about the 1952 Topps high number cards. That was originally supposed to be this video. And the thing is that those high number cards will likely always be really controversial. I mean, this card needs no introduction, right? All of these high number 1952 cards are legendary and are extremely expensive. Now, if you're a collector, you need to know that the high number cards were only inserted in these red and blue 5-cent packs. Most of the 1952 Topps packs that remain will not have a mantle no matter what. The other thing you need to know is that the high number series was released really late in 1952, which is why there are so few of these cards out there. Well, plus a bunch of them were either dumped in the ocean or destroyed in a fire, depending on whose story you believe. Anyway, the problem that Topps ran into is the same problem that Leaf ran into, right? Topps had signed contracts with players, but those players already had exclusive contracts with Bowman. You know, these were guys like, I don't know, Mickey Mantle. That's right, this card that now sells for millions of dollars technically was not legally printed. Like many other star players, Mantle had already had an exclusive contract with Bowman. And of course, that meant that Mantle technically should not have been able to sign this non-exclusive release document with Topps, which he did in July 1952. So that was really the last straw for Bowman. Bowman sued Topps in court, and the case took years. In 1953, Topps didn't print cards for players who Bowman had exclusive contracts with. That's the reason why 1953 Topps is so small and why there are so many holes in the card numbering. And of course, Bowman hit back with one of the most beautiful baseball card sets of all time. In my opinion, 1953 Bowman Color actually is the greatest baseball card set of all time. These cards are just amazing in every sense, truly the most beautiful set that I've ever seen. These cards also used to be relatively affordable for years, though they certainly aren't anymore. In my personal opinion, 1953 Bowman Color is the best baseball card set of all time. I've never seen cards anywhere else that look anything like that, and that really is a design to aspire to. And anyway, Bowman coming out with a set like that led to what we call the Bubblegum Card Wars that lasted through 1955. Now, Topps did win in the end, but this is not because Topps had the superior product. You see, the thing is that Mr. Bowman sold his company off way back in April 1952, back when Topps was, I guess, first coming out with that famous set. The new corporate owners of the Bowman Baseball Card Company, or whatever it was called, tried their hardest to compete directly with Topps, but the legal battles resulted in huge costs as the years went on. I mean, it was a huge amount of money to pay to try to defend their rights in court. And so by the time that Bowman was sold again late in 1955, despite the fact that Bowman had won that legal case in the end, the new owners still won it out, and so the company just folded. Now, I really do need to make that last part clear. It's really not true that Topps won the Bubblegum Card Wars. Instead, what actually happened is that Bowman gave up. As beautiful as these cards look, the reason Topps came out on top is because it was so aggressive in attacking Bowman's monopoly. But this is where the irony sits in, right? Topps had just won that Bubblegum Card War by challenging Bowman's monopolistic status. Then Topps turned around with very similar contracts and used the same arguments that Bowman had used to defend its own monopoly. It was sort of like this shield that it picked up from the vanquished foe, right? And the court battles here raged on for decades. See, this part is why I'm telling you that this is not a chronological video. So, for example, in 1963, Fleer started signing players to baseball card contracts to challenge Topps' position. Topps was able to defeat Fleer in court in October 1963, but the battle raged on through endless appeals. Of course, these newspaper promises of FTC investigations never really amounted to anything, at least not in the early 1960s. In 1980, the courts finally ruled in favor of Fleer and ordered that Fleer and a company called Donruss be allowed to create baseball cards to break up the Topps monopoly. Now, as you know, Topps, under Fanatics, has ascended again to monopoly status. In fact, it did so before Fanatics came along and ruined everything, right? The monopoly came back in 2009, and that was mostly because of the utter and absolute stupidity on the part of Major League Baseball properties. And it really drives me nuts that they made this decision and that it's been allowed to stand. I mean, I don't want to make a lot of political comments, but deals like this make me worry about the state of the United States economy. 2009 Topps Baseball is not exactly the greatest looking set of all time, and I honestly can't say that any of the card sets since have looked all that good. Exclusive contracts are simply bad for the hobby, and we could use a lot less of these. So one of the reasons why I really hate exclusive contracts with baseball card and other sports card companies is because the quality of the cards will always suffer. The best Topps sets of all time came out in the early 1950s. Those are the sets that I just showed you. Topps kept the quality up for a couple of years, but by the early 1960s, it was coming out with stinkers all over the place. And that's what monopolies do. They cut costs as much as possible and they raise prices. Now, 1957 Topps was technically a Monopoly era set, but to be honest, this is one of the best sets I've ever seen. Not only did this set establish the standard baseball card size, but it was also simply a well-designed set. These cards just look great. If Topps could have come out with a set like this every year, I would have nothing to complain about. Fast forward a few years, however, and you start seeing odd designs and really poor card quality. And honestly, some of these cards just look weird. That's all I've got to say about it. And well, the quality went downhill as the years went by. It's the same sort of thing that we've seen with Topps sets since 2009, actually. Now, these days, they try to confuse you because they give you a bunch of bling and the foil cards and like the signed this thing and this is the, played jersey thing and whatever. I don't know why anybody of you guys care about this stuff. It's all garbage, right? It likely is not going to have much value in the long term because there's no artistic appeal to it. Back in the 1970s, however, when Topps was coming out with a bunch of crap, there wasn't anything that they had to disguise just how awful the product really was. And so you've got sets like 1970 Topps, which is just boring. I do like 1972 Topps, well, sort of. It strikes me, though, as being a little bit loud. 1975 Topps is another one of those loud sets, and the color scheme is just hideous. And it feels like Topps had given up by the late 1970s. But the funny thing is that we know from court documents that Topps was basically printing money during those years. Baseball card collecting was on the way up in the 1970s. This is because a bunch of guys who remember the early 50s now had money and were going around the United States holding different conventions and hotels and buying as many like 53 and 54 cards off of people as they possibly could, right? Like everybody saw what was happening with the prices and everybody wanted in on the industry. This is where the junk wax era really begins, right? That's actually the big industry secret, by the way, that nobody talks about, and everybody comes onto the YouTube comment section to tell me that I'm wrong about. The truth is that our junk wax era probably started sometime in the 1970s. Topps increased the price of each pack of cards. This coincided with the inflation and with the rise in gas prices in like 73, 74, sometime around then. The prices went up, and the supply of cards also went up. Now, if you're a serious collector, you know right away that that is a dangerous combination. But the other thing you've got to understand is that Topps was not just printing baseball cards. So way back in 1954, Topps created a small hockey set that still ranks as one of the nicest looking hockey sets of all time. At some point in time in the 1950s, Topps entered into a direct agreement with an old Canadian company known as OPC. And starting in 1958, Topps would design the cards that OPC would print and distribute throughout Canada. This is easy to see if you look at the text on the fold in the wax pack. Now that really is that divide and conquer strategy. Topps and OPC worked together and were able to push Parkhurst out of the hockey card game entirely. Topps was also eventually able to kick Fleer out of football cards in the United States, and then it reluctantly started to make some basketball cards starting in the late 60s, only to exit that market in the early 80s. And there was one other major sport that Topps got its hands on back in the Monopoly days, and this is a sport that I'm willing most of you probably don't know anything about. Back in 1958, the A&BC Chewing Company of England came out with this soccer card set. These cards are not exactly the greatest in the world, but at least they were something. In the space of under 2 years, A&BC was using card designs that came straight from Topps. In fact, the best of the A&BC sets were all made under their agreement with Topps. So this is the part of the Topps story that nobody, at least in the United States, ever tells, mostly because nobody here knows about it. So A&BC was this really obscure British company, but Topps decided to do business with it anyway for like some reason. I'll never figure out why. And as we'll see here in a minute, this was a genius move on the part of Topps management. The 1963 A&BC football set is basically the long-lost cousin to 1962 Topps baseball. I still think that the design is as ugly as sin, but it's obvious that Topps had a major influence on what this British company was doing. And yeah, the card quality really wasn't great, but that was par for the course for Topps in the 1960s. Now, in the immediate post-war years, having a relationship with a British company probably didn't seem all that important. It might have looked like a pretty bad idea, even going into the late 1950s, right? I mean, the United Kingdom was not exactly like the worst in the world in terms of economics, but it was kind of sinking behind what the United States was doing at the time. No offense to my British viewers. But there was one British pop sensation in the early 1960s that was bigger than anything else in the world, and it just so happens that A&BC was in the right place at the right time. A&BC came out with this set featuring the Beatles in early 1964. Believe it or not, the cards are actually not all that popular with collectors, probably because so many of them were printed. The 2 pence pack would give you a stick of gum and one Beatles card, similar to how things worked for years in the United States. Now, Topps got in on the ground floor with this one and was able to get an exclusive contract to print those Beatle cards in the United States and Canada. Now, technically, the Canadian cards were printed and distributed by OPC, but the contract itself, as usual, went through Topps. And this set was just massive. I mean, the thing is that these days, this Beatles set really is not all that popular. Some of the cards look like outtake photos from somebody's summer vacation, and the well-focused photos just look dated. But these packs were huge sellers for Topps and made the company a ton of money. In fact, if you look at newspapers from 1964, you will discover that the Topps Beatles set was the set everyone was talking about, not the baseball cards. Anyway, that cozy relationship between Topps and A&BC lasted for a little while, but then it fell apart in the 1970s. And yet, Topps did not wind up exiting the soccer card market, at least not for a few years. It was sometime around 1974 that there was a falling out between the two companies. A&BC disappeared after this 1974 set, never to be heard from again. Topps, meanwhile, came out with a soccer set in 1975 that looked exactly like that year's baseball card set. They kept the culturally appropriate footballer name on the pack. But if you look over at the fine print, you'll realize that the cards were manufactured and printed in the United States and then distributed through the branch in Essex. Topps had 3 years of this nonsense before it eventually exited the soccer card market. Unfortunately, the cards never really caught on over there. Well, you win some, you lose some, I guess. Now, Topps did an okay job with the monopolistic presence over the years. And even in the markets where it didn't really have much of a monopoly, Topps was able to occasionally come up with ideas that were innovative and impressive. I mean, everybody knows that Topps was all over these movie tie-ins back in the 1970s, right? And Topps also came out with crap like these Smurf Super cards, whatever this is supposed to be. But it was really the Garbage Pail Kids set of 1985 that showed that Topps still had what it took to be creative. It's corny, sure, but these cards are just awesome, and this was a great idea right from the start. Now, I bring up all of the good stuff because it's time to talk about the bad stuff, right? We're going to talk about the bad side here of Topps and baseball cards and how things are kind of coming to an end again. I mean, all good things do eventually come to an end, and for Topps, the good stuff has come to an end multiple times over the years. In fact, there are days where I wonder how in the world the company managed to stick around for this long. I mean, 1980 Topps is remembered as a classic set, right? But it really only has that reputation because of a single card. That would be the Rickey Henderson rookie. Topps followed that up with a string of really ugly designs. By 1984, Topps had made a habit of overprinting its blocky-looking cards. Meanwhile, Donruss was busy making one of the nicest-looking sets of all time. Now, Topps was weak and getting weaker. Now, they did make great-looking sets in 1986 and 1987, at least by my opinion, but not even that could prevent it from losing market share. Sure, the company was still making money at like a silly rate. By the way, if you want to know why they printed so many stupid cards in the late 80s and very early 90s, the reason why is because like people were buying them. Maybe not all the kids were buying them, although a lot of us did, but there were like dealers who were buying this stuff, there were investors buying this stuff. As long as people would buy it, they would print billions of copies of every card if they could, right? The problem though is that Topps' competitors saw that there was this much money in the market, and the problem became really obvious when this company called Upper Deck burst on the scene in 1989. I'll be honest with you guys, even though the cards are worthless and the photos are boring, I really love 1986 Topps baseball. And there will always be a special place in my heart for the beauty and glory of 1987 Topps. But 1989 Topps just does not look right to me no matter how many chances I give it. And Topps seriously did not stand a chance when it was up against that Upper Deck set, which was one of the greatest baseball card sets of all time. Now, over the years, the biggest problem that Topps has been with the lack of innovation, and I'll tell you why this is the case. When you get a company that builds and builds and builds and is huge and has like international dealings, and we've got all the licensing deals, and we're going to have like this card set come out and that card set come out and the Beatles and all this other stuff, you have to have a lot of people working for your company to get this to work. So yeah, you do have, the artistic people who are down here, you got your management up there, but then you got to have manager. You know what I'm saying? You got to have layers of middle management and all of the useless stuff. I know what this is. I used to be a middle manager, right? Back in my government days, I was totally useless, right? I'll be perfectly honest with you. Like, the problem that you have with a company like Topps is that this sort of corporate structure makes any sort of actual innovation literally impossible because you got to pass it through too many people. So back in like the 1980s, nobody at Topps said, hey, you know what? We should look back to what worked in the 1950s. No, everybody was thinking about blocky designs, trying to make the cards look like uniform and straight, and that trend continued for a little while. I mean, I know that some of you like this set for whatever bizarre reason, but I wish I could destroy all of the 1990 Topps cards that are out there. As a kid, I was a big fan of 1991 Topps, though the cards are honestly really bland compared with the competition. I mean, at least they had some action cards, I guess, but it's really the 1991 Topps Desert Shield cards that everybody wants. And I'll just intervene here to say that if you really want those Desert Shield cards, you got to look out for counterfeits. Honestly, I don't know that there's a good way to test counterfeits with the naked eye unless you've seen a lot of these. What you really want is something that has been graded by a reputable grading company, not like backwards, downstairs Hollywood grading or something like that. Now, you want something that's big, you want BGE, you want PSA, you want some of the big boys that you recognize, right? And do your homework too before you buy, right? Go over to the Facebook groups, ask people, what do you think about this and that and so on. The other thing to remember is that the distribution of those Desert Shield cards was also really sketchy, right? So Topps was going to put this out through distributors that had military contracts. Well, maybe it got lost in shipping and wound up in your closet, which I think is what happened to most of these boxes, right? A lot of distributors just held on to it because they knew that this was so short printed. And remember that these are just 1991 Topps baseball cards with a stupid stamp. It's not like they're any better, look different. They're not really glossy. They don't you can't use them to play a game or something like that. They don't do backflips, right? I mean, it's just 1991 Topps. Anyway, Topps decided after a couple of years that it probably should at least try to compete with Upper Deck, and so it finally decided to come out with something that was higher quality. Topps Stadium Club was the new premium product, and the earlier versions came in these really cool boxes. Topps did the same thing again in 1992, and don't worry, these things are worthless. The cards look okay, I guess, but they're really not much better than the base set. Fleer Ultra, meanwhile, was eating Topps' lunch with amazing sets like this one. And, well, that really was the start of the first major Topps decline. Now, every single time that Topps has actually faced competition, its products have gone into a deep decline. Now, I've always been a big fan of 1994 Topps baseball, even though the cards are basically worthless. Jump ahead to 1996, though, and you'll find really crappy set designs and boring cards that are hard to read. The baseball card industry had essentially collapsed because of the players' strike, and it didn't help that Topps decided to make the cards completely illegible. And that trend continued up to right before Topps got its monopoly back, with horrible designs like this 2008 set. Now, we could say the exact same thing about Topps cards in the 2000s, starting with 2009. I can't honestly think of a single Topps base set that I have liked since 1994. And I know all about at least the 2008 base set, by the way. I bought tons of packs of that one over at the local gas station. I was at university at the time and had some, spending money. And I would be like, oh, Saturday morning, I'll go get a Coke and some Topps cards, right? Yeah, I should have saved my money on that stuff. I'd be in better shape, right? I should have just bought more old Stratomatic baseball card sets instead. Anyway, even with all of this decline, Topps has managed to stick around after all these years and is probably going to stick around for the future despite the best efforts of fanatics to run the company into the ground. I mean, for example, this is a card from 2023 Topps, though I bet you couldn't tell. I suppose it looks a little different than 2024 Topps, so the overall feeling is pretty much the same. 2025 Topps is the same with this crisp computerized design and with cards that just feel boring. And the back of Otani's card here just makes me want to cry. So yeah, I mean, it's like lily white. Yeah, you can read it, but can't they like go back to the old cardboard? Couldn't they do an old style set just for once, just one time, for old time's sake, right? Let's do the old style set and let's sell it for cheap. Let's make it $1 a pack instead of like $5 or whatever it is today, right? I mean, why does everything have to be so clean and so neat? I've always hated the illegible backs. I complain about that all the time, right? But at least they have some character. At least you'll see like strange stuff on them and you'll see like cartoons and stuff. These modern sets, it's like looking at a freaking spreadsheet. I hate it, right? I feel like I'm at work when I look at these cards. Why can't we go back to something that's fun and that's, you know, like innovative and that looks good? Does everything these days have to be computer designed? Does it all have to be controlled by AI? Of course, the one saving grace that Topps has had in recent years has been Topps Heritage. And honestly, I don't understand why Topps didn't think of the Heritage idea back in the late 1980s. You should know, though, that even the earlier Topps Heritage sets were heavily computer designed, which is why they feel different than the older cards. For example, you would think that this 2001 Topps Heritage Jeter card would be like an all-time classic with the old 1952 Topps design and all. And it's not an awful card, I guess, but it still looks way too computerized. It doesn't have any artistic flavor to it. It's always going to pale in comparison with the real 1952 Topps cards. And the crazy thing is that some of those heritage sets, like the older ones especially, end up rivaling the original sets in price. I'm talking about like the sets that were made like in the 50s, right? And the reason why is because Topps deliberately short printed the newer heritage sets. So what I'm going to tell you is I don't think it's necessarily an awful idea to buy the heritage sets instead of the modern base sets, right? But you do want to be careful, right? Now, I can't give you financial advice. I am not a financial advisor, right? I'm just a guy who likes to talk about baseball cards. But what you have to remember is that like the old school sets, the old sets from the 50s, even the 60s, though I kind of dog on them, there is something special about them that you do not see in these modern sets. The modern sets feel very sterile. They feel like they were put together with a computer. They don't have that same artistic feeling to them because Topps doesn't really employ artists. That's the problem. So if you're thinking sort of long term, there's a reason why sophisticated baseball card collectors tend to prefer stuff like the Topps sets from the early 50s. Anyway, at the moment, the courts are ruling in favor of the Fanatics monopoly under the Topps brand name. That brand dominance will likely not last forever, however. In addition to collector frustration, Fanatics also faces the very real risk of overextending itself, which is something that Topps actually did back in the 1980s. Do you remember the Topps Nintendo cards from 1989? Or the same year, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set? I had those cards. Sets like these didn't sell except to dumb kids like me, and the licensing fees and the printing costs were pretty damaging to the company. And the biggest thing that Fanatics has to worry about today is the fact that so many of its potential customers are spending their money on other card products instead. Anyway, so the big question, of course, is what does the future hold, right? Is Topps going to be around for years to come, or are the good times going to end? Now, as far as I am concerned, I think that Topps ended as soon as Fanatics bought out the brand. And although it will eventually take years, I do think that we will eventually, finally see a company that challenges the monopoly that Fanatics has, the way that Fleer did all of those years ago, and the way that Topps did, by the way, back in the 1950s, right? Is it going to be Panini? I kind of doubt it. I don't think that Panini is a great company. I don't think that they're any better than Fanatics, right? Could it be Upper Deck again? Maybe, though I think that company's gone downhill. I think we'll probably see somebody else come along one of these years. Maybe when baseball is a little bit more popular, a little bit more widespread in this country. Now, the thing is, as you know, they don't sell cards with bubblegum anymore. Topps stopped that years ago or whatever. I don't even know if bazooka bubblegum is still a thing these days, right? I don't pay any attention to that. But the cards are still there and the cards still exist. So yeah, we'll see what the future holds, though I will tell you this. My kids don't own any sports cards, and they all think I'm nuts for getting so deep into this stuff. Let that sink in.